Recording started. There we go. So if you mute your mics, unless you're prepared to talk, let Florin carry away.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I'm going to take a moment here to set up my Vice. I was setting up other things and I just forgot to set up my Vice, so sorry about that. So you can probably pause the recording so you don't have to delete this stuff later on. So I was going to do some fry and an Alevin pattern. Now, all these patterns are built on the same sort of standard set of things. And I'm going to begin by doing the body and then talk about the rest of it. So in this particular case, I'm using a size 8 saltwater hook from Arex. And you can see this is it's a reasonably longish shank hook compared to the other hook that I'm going to be using today, which is the Togan, which is also, this is a size 8. You can see it's a fair bit smaller. It's almost like being a full size smaller. And the body, so I put up pictures and instructions for 3 flies there. But they all share this one thing, this silver body. And the silver body is just regular silver mylar, and it's wrapped over with some silver wire as a rib to reinforce that mylar, which can be a little fragile. So what I normally do is I take a batch of hooks, I take a batch of prepared bodies at the end, and then tie my flies, and that's how I typically do them. So tie the mylar second after you tied on the wire. If you don't want an unsightly black band from the thread here at the end, just make one wrap in place to cover up all the thread near the bend of the hook. And wrap the mylar forward.
Florian, do you ever use a red tag at the end?
I could, I guess. That doesn't sound like a bad idea. Or you could just tie these flies with red thread, and then the tag is really easy to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a nice idea. I was aiming for trying to be true to the patterns as I saw them published, and also kind of aiming for the sparse version of these flies. But yeah, red tag could be a nice addition to it. And then I counterwind the silver wire. Make sure that I leave some room there for the head of the fly. Helicopter the wire away. Do a couple of whip finishes. And that's the body. Okay. And what I normally do is I just tie a big bunch of these things and have them ready to put on wings or whatever else I want to put on them. The alternative to this is for the smaller size, and here I'm going to the shorter shank hook. So this is the Togan hook, which is kind of similar to the Masted 34007 saltwater hook. And here I do a little variation. Dave is going to tie the fly with a throat on it made out of feathers and everything. I didn't quite have the correct feather, and then I saw somebody doing these flies with an orange bead. So then I got interested in that idea, and I tried some flies with orange beads, and yes, it does seem to be possible to tie flies with orange beads instead of a throat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin by tying my wire under the shank of the hook and right up against the eye of the hook. Okay? I don't want this to start too far behind because I'm going to put, oh, sorry, unwind, because I like to keep my wire on the bobbin. I need to put the bead before I do anything else. So I have an orange glass bead here, which is a 1/8 of an inch bead. And I'm going to slip that on to my silver wire. Okay. So the wire is on the bobbin, the bead is on the wire, and now I'm going back to where I was before. So attaching the thread, attaching the wire right behind here. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip this bead. And first I need to move the thread a little bit further behind, a few wraps on the hook. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to position this bead on the wire underneath the hook. Maybe I should zoom in at attach here. So you can actually see what I'm up to. Okay. So see the wire is attached at the front. Now the bead is under the hook. And then I'm going to secure the thread, the wire right behind here. Okay, so position the bead, make sure that it is in the position you want it to be in, and then continue wrapping the thread over the wire going backwards and slowly shifting the wire to the near side of the hook towards you. Okay. And from this point on, it's the same as before. Take the tinsel, silver one side, gold the other side. I want the silver up, so I'm going to tie the gold side in. Not too long because I don't want to go past the bead. Secure properly. And then wrap the tinsel.
Florin, is that a glass bead?
Yes. That's the only orange bead I had. But I guess for that egg sac imitation, it's probably the right thing to have. Something that's nicely translucent. Okay, so bring the tinsel right behind the bead. And then counterwind with wire.
What gauge of wire are you using to secure the bead?
Just a moment. I think it's the medium, the uni medium size.
Yeah.
Whatever that means, I never really bothered to measure it. So it's what uni labels medium wire. You don't want it
Thank-
too thick. It's the same wire that I use for the ribbing to kind of make a smoother process. I have some finer wire, which is stainless steel, which probably might not be a bad idea. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to whip finish here. Put two little whip finishes right in that spot between the bead and the body. And at this point, you might do a bunch of these things and then bring out your 5-minute epoxy and have a go. I experimented with a little bit of this raid zap stuff last night, and it seems to work. So this is the more viscous variety. So this is UV resin. And so what I was doing is there's a gap here and between the hook and the bead, not a big one, but it is a little bit of a gap. And the other thing is that the way this is done this far, the only thing that's holding that bead to the hook is the wire, which is fairly fine wire, and I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with only that. So give it a good zap of UV light. I should do. Yeah, and you can look it over and see if there is any more gap filling you want to do. I think this would be the time, you know, before you start adding feathers and stuff. Okay. So this is the body for the Alevin, and now the only thing that's left to do is to start adding wings. So this one is ready to have the wing added to it, and it's just plain natural color Mallard. So now I have to go and restart the thread in front of the bead. And just take a Mallard feather and select a strip of it, pull it off the stem, and fold it in two as best as I can. This is kind of fine tips. It does get a little straggly.
Florin, you tied UV resin on there. Have you
Yeah.
ever taken your ultraviolet light flashlight out with you fishing and recharged the UV?
No.
Interesting enough, we have a puppy and we've been using going out at night with a glow in the dark ball, and we recharge it. And of course it gets brighter. I wondered if the same theory would hold to the UV resin that we use for flies. Any comment on that, Dennis?
I don't think anything happens. I think it's simply
No.
once the polymerization takes place, that's a stable chemical as far as I know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're two
in
different products. They're two different products. The UV resin is a UV set glue where ultraviolet causes the glue to polymerize. The other UV stuff you're talking about is stuff that has a chemical in it that absorbs ultraviolet energy and then releases it later as visible light. They're two completely different products.
And they used to use them in old fishing lures. And matter of fact, when I got this auction stuff here and I was cleaning it up, there were a lot of beads that were acting like that. They charge up just for about 5 minutes or so, and then they diminish.
Well, I remember going fishing and they would use, they didn't have UV lights per se, but they would use fluorescent lights on the boat and put all the lures along the strip there with a light on top of them to recharge them. Yeah.
That reminds me of fishing one evening in Lake Taupo at the mouth of the Tarangi-Taupo River and using what they call a lumo fly, which is a little piece of plastic that emits light after it's been energized by light. And we just used an off-camera flash to energize it, and then it would glow in the dark for about 20 minutes before you had to do it again.
Anyway, put a little coating of something, head cement or a bit more resin on the head of the fly, and that's this one. And then for the other flies, it's basically just the tinsel body that you've pre-tied, presumably, and you add the wing color of your choice. So there it kind of goes pretty fast. I've done a few with, I have some olive dyed Mallard as well. You can actually see the hook through the feather here. And they don't look too bad. I decided I was going to tie a few of these as well. And it's very similar process. This is more of a rolled wing kind of thing that I'm doing. It's not the perfectly aligned strips and all of that. Oh, this is a right mess. Okay, forget that. Even for a rolled wing, that was rather terrible. I don't know. I'm into a batch of Mallard that I'm kind of struggling with a little bit. Okay. There you go. Okay, so take a bunch of Mallard fibers. Do a few soft loops. We'll attach it right on top of the hook. And the excess.
Stephen, can you mute your mic? We're getting a lot of ambient noise that's coming up.
And then just finish off the head.
Thank you.
And so if you go to Lindgren's book, you're going to see there's one fly that has a chocolate brown wing, and it's called a Tinsel. And there's another one that has a natural Mallard wing, and it's called Mallard and Silver. But to me, they're all the same kind of idea of a fly. Okay, and you vary the size. What I did here is I varied the size of the fly by varying the hook style. So you can see here the Alevin is a significantly smaller fly than the other one. Okay, so this is a, just play a little bit with the length of the shank, and just a little bit of head cement, and we are done with the fly. And Dave can do the really proper, fully dressed, nice salmon fry. So
Florin, that was really good. Thank you.
okay. The idea here is that, this is kind of the bare bone stuff, and then you can start adding things that's is been suggested, tags, throats, under wings, over wings, all those other things. What I would say is, I think these are great practice flies to get a sense of how these things are tied before moving on to the more seriously involved ones. So anyway, I like to tie simple flies. So for me, this is
Florin.
the thing. Okay, Dave, all yours.
Oh, Florin, a question for you.
Yes.
Have you actually used the fly with the egg sac, and do you see any potential for missed hookups because of that bead hanging down?
I don't think there'll be potential for missed hookups with that bead hanging down. I have not used this. The first time I've tied any of these flies was this past week.
Oh, okay.
And it was all stirred up by this great conversation that has been going on salmon fry and Alevins, and Ron Esty contributed a lot of emails to that conversation, and so it was just a flurry of back and forth between Ron, Dave, and I as I was preparing for tying flies for this weekend. And so, then I hit the books and the internet and everything. So I'm sure there are more people out there who can answer that question way better than I.
Yeah, I'm curious if you tie that fly with the bead on the top side of the shank, the opposite side from the hook point, if it would ride essentially upside down and also be less snag proof potentially.
That is a thought. You could take that pattern, and I was thinking of possibilities there. You could add a little bit of lead wire inside that bead, right? So what I'm saying is, maybe I should just put the fly in the vise again, right? So if you were to take this fly here and tie upside down, there, you could thread also a piece of lead wire in between here to add some weight on the belly, right? And if you did all of that before you build the body, right, then you'd weigh your hook more heavily on one side, so it should flip. Another possibility to doing that would be to also tie some eyes in front of the bead, and then it would definitely flip. But I don't know if the fly doesn't get a little too overloaded with things. I haven't tried it yet, so it might, just putting the bead on the other side might be enough to flip the hook, which is a good idea. I agree.
Well, that leads to the discussion about innovating off of existing fly patterns.
Where would you fish that, Florin?
The intent was to fish these
in the
for
interior BC. That's where it's been fished, but it seems to be an idea to fish also when right after the salmon eggs have hatched, and some of these alevins might be caught in the current by accident. And
You think that would be a good cutthroat fly?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a
Well, that's what I was
cutthroat.
thinking.
That's what it's meant for.
yeah, that's what led to the discussion about different kinds of small fly patterns for Alevins and par and whatnot that are headed out to the sea, which from what I understand for both chum and for coho, it doesn't happen very long when they finally decide they're headed to sea. It doesn't take more than a couple of days before they're all gone. So it's kind of a timing pattern, and you're fishing for cutthroat trout. The chum patterns apparently are quite small, probably less than an inch long or about an inch long. And the coho patterns are probably a little longer. The pattern that I'm talking about, or I'm going to tie, came about as a result of. So Roman or Florin, have you got your screen grabbed here? Because I should be on speaker view. Let's see here.
Oh, I thought I stopped sharing. So you
Yeah, yeah, you're up on the top here. So
how about
no, that didn't do it.
I'm seeing you, Dave.
Oh, you're seeing me. Okay, all right. As long as you're seeing what I'm tying. So the pattern that I started with was something that Barry Stokes with the Haig Brown guys had suggested some materials, and I saw shortly saw a sample of one of his, and he said that he tied it a little longer, and he put eyes on it. So I made an attempt, and I found that in order to put these stick-on eyes on that I have, and they're about the smallest ones I could find in my inventory, I ended up with this bulbous head that looked ugly as sin. So I said, to heck with that noise. Let's get rid of the eye part, and let's start with something that's a little more manageable. So I tied this guy here. Now this is tied on a size 6 hook. So it's a little longer than what you would need for the standard chum fry or some of the smaller coho fry. So then I downsized it and made it a little more sparse. And I tried the bead trick. In this case, I actually put the bead onto the shank and put it right up, pushed the bead right up to the eye of the hook, then tied the tinsel body. I shoved the bead back as far as I could onto the tinsel, then tied the wing, and then tied onto the head. And I think that looks okay. It's not terrific. And then I went back to the original pattern, which uses a marabou throat. And instead of just being tinsel fly, this has a body of tinsel, but the overwing is fairly robust. It's not really robust. It's kind of in between sparse and robust. And it's got a topping on it of teal. And the throat in this case is marabou. So that's the one I'm going to do. And so what I have is a debarbed size 6 hook, 3x long. And the long one, you need it long in order to get that tinsel body that makes it look so nice. And then tinsel. Now I found that using this number 12 that I got from Robinson's is better than the number 10, which is wider. I find it, I get fewer bumps. Also, I'm using this oval overwrap rather than wire. It's an oval tinsel. And then the tail is going to be mallard flag. So I'm starting with 8/0 black tying thread. And I'm going to start at the front, and I'm going to very quickly dress the hook all the way back. Now, one of the tricks with tinsel bodies is making sure that you don't get any lumps underneath where you're wrapping the tinsel. Otherwise, it tends to kink up and doesn't make a nice smooth body. So I'm going to take this right back to where the barb used to be. Oh, and speaking of barbs, I found with these particular these Timco hooks, they're kind of brittle. And when you try to bend the barb down, the barb often breaks off and leaves a rough piece of shank. So I discovered that my wife had an old miniature Dremel tool that I can grind them thing down with. So her stained glass Dremel tool is now mine because she hasn't used it for a decade or so. So what I do for a tail is I take a mallard flank feather like this guy, and I will strip all of the stuff off the sides. And I'll just show you. I'll just grab stroke it back and peel it off the end. And I do that off both sides. And I take it down until I've got a really small piece of mallard like that. And I see it's curved. And to take that curve, some of that curve out, I just take it between my thumb and forefinger and put my fingernail on it, on the outside of the curve, and just very gently stroke it back. And that straightens it out a bit. Makes it a little easier to tie on. I'm going to lay that down so the curve is facing upward. And I'm going to wrap onto the stem, just two very light wraps. I'm going to wiggle that stem until it's right on top of the hook. And then I'm going to pull the stem into those wraps, pull it forward until I get the right length of tail. You can see that's about gap. And you can see the tail now is curved up a little bit, which is what I want. And I'm going to wrap over this stuff, stem and remaining material, right up to about 2/3 of the way up the hook. I'm going to trim the stem off. Now at that point, I'm going to get my tinsel on, and I'm going to tie it in again about a 1/4 inch back of the eye. And I'm going to roll it. Once I've got it tied on, I'm going to roll it over so that it's on the underside of the hook. And I'm going to wrap that all the way down. And again, trying to keep it nice and even. I'm going to bring my thread back up again, trying to keep that shank and body of the hook nice and smooth. I'm going to take my tinsel, and I'm going to do the same thing. And unlike, I'm going to tie it on so that the gold side of the tinsel is facing me. And when I tie it on, I'm going to hold it on the near side of the hook a little bit. So the first thread wrap rolls the tinsel on top of the hook. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to fairly close wraps all the way down. And that wraps the tinsel around the top of the hook shank, right back to where I've tied both the tinsel and the oval tinsel together and the tail. Now what happens is that first wrap of tinsel is going to flop over and give me the silver side out. Again, wrap the thread forward, trying to keep that body nice and smooth. Back up to there. I'm just going to let that hang. I'm going to take my Griffin rotating head hackle pliers. And then I'm going to start wrapping. And that first wrap is the key. If I get that first wrap so that it's silver side out, I'm in business. And if I go slowly and wrap this nice and evenly, where it's just a teeny bit of overlap between the one and the previous wrap with no gap, I will get a nice, smooth, shiny body with no kinks. And I just take my time and get it all the way up. So this is a trick with all of these silver tinsel bodies, is if you keep the hook shank fairly smooth and even, you're not going to get bumps in this tinsel body. I'm going to tie it off. 3 in behind. Pick it up. A couple of wraps in front to make sure you lock it in. If you don't lock it in, I've had this happen more than once. You don't lock it in properly. When you snip it off, it unwraps all the way back and you get this little curly cue of tinsel that you can't get rid of. I'm going to do the same thing with the rib, which is this oval tinsel. And I don't need a whole lot of that because it's going to, and I'm going to make the first wrap underneath and open wraps spiraled up the body, trying to keep them fairly even. And you don't need a whole whack of them. 5, 6 wraps on this size of hook is probably plenty. And that one didn't go quite right. It went a little bit backwards. There we go. There we go. And again over the top. This one I worry less about in terms of unraveling. Trim it off and flatten it out. Now, one of the things I want to do here is I'm going to build a little bit of a bump right in front of where that tinsel is. And the reason for that is I'm going to want the wing to stand up at a bit of an angle rather than being parallel to the hook shank. And this little tapered bump is what's going to do that for me. Now I turn the hook upside down and I'm going to put my little marabou throat in. And that's the marabou. I'm just going to take a few strands off the side. Not too many. Because when I pull it off, I get these little curly cues. They're hard to manage. I'm just going to trim them off. And I'm going to put this on here about halfway down the clump. I'm going to do a quick wrap like that. I'm going to take the stubs and pull them back, wrap in front of them so that it's a single clump of marabou. A couple of wraps in behind. Just don't want to, I want this to look like a single clump. Facing a bit towards the back. Then I'm going to pull all this extra material out here and cut that off about 1/8 of an inch long. And trim it down a little bit from the front. All we're doing here is showing some gills for the Alevin, maybe a bit of a hot spot for the fish to strike at. Turn it back over upright and position my thread just about halfway between there. I tied that stuff in on this little ramp that I built. Then comes the polar bear. And I'm going to pick polar bear that's not too long because I don't need polar bear more than the length of the fly. And I'm not going to take a huge clump. I'm going to take a little bit, maybe less than the gap of the hook. Cut it up right down near the skin. And do what we normally do with polar bear, which is get all the fuzzy bits out. And if I have any really long ones, I'm going to snark them out of there too. Got my hair stacker. Put the polar bear in there. Stack it up. And at this point now, I've got a nicely stacked batch of polar bear, and I'm gonna hold it up to the hook to see how sparse I want to make it. That might be a little bit too much, so I'm just gonna take a few fibers out, make it a little more sparse. Don't want to overdress this fly. Then I'm gonna measure the hair right to the tail length. Grab it in my left hand, right where the throat is there. And I'm going to take the butt end and I'm going to trim that about an 1/8 of an inch shy of where I've got it pinched. You can see I've got a very short piece here. I'm going to do what I do with Clouser minnows. I'm going to hold that hair at about a 45-degree angle with the butts just shy of the eye. I'm going to make that first loose wrap over top to cinch it on. And I'm going to wrap down all the butts right down to the eye. And I'm going to come backwards up this thing and wrap back off that clump of hook to make sure that it's centered on top of the hook till I get my wraps back almost to where the throat is. I'm going to go in behind it, lift it up and go in behind it with a few wraps, pulling that forward a little bit. And that's what makes that hair wing stand up just a little bit. So now I have it at a bit of an angle. Now the next thing for this is this stuff. It's called, stuff I've got is called rainbow thread, but you can get any of this flash material. It's very fine flash material. And in these packages, I think we talked about it once before, if you make a little slit in the side of the package, you can get your scissors in there and pull 2 or 3 strands out without the whole thing coming out and getting all tied up. I've already done that, and I've got like 3 strands of that flash, and I'm going to fold it in half, roughly, and cut the loop. Then I'm going to take that and I'm going to lay it alongside the hook at the halfway point on the near side and put a loose wrap there. Then take the stuff that's sticking out front, pull it around to the other side and wrap that down. And I'm going to wrap right back so it's seated right next to the polar bear. Now these are long, so I'm going to pull them up a little bit and trim them off so they don't stick out too much past the end of the wing. Now all this does is this is sparse, fairly sparse, but it adds a fair bit of flash to the fly. And I'm going to end up with a couple of bits that stick out at odd angles, so I'm going to trim them off just because of the way this stuff kinks when it's tied on. There we go. And then we're for topping. And the topping is, once again, it's mallard flank. And what I do for that is I pick a mallard flank that when you pull these fibers out to the side, they're at least the length of the wing. Then I strip all the fuzz off the bottom so I can get at the stuff. And I've already pre-done that. So now I've got the mallard flank here. I'm going to use the ones that are long. And I'm just going to use what's off one side. And I'm going to stroke them out so that they're at right angles to the stem. What that does is that evens up the tip. And you'll see that there's a bit of a curve to the fly, to the feather. So I'm going to just grab those and I'm going to pull them off the shank of the feather. Now you see they're a bit curved. And I'm going to put these down so the curve is facing down onto the top of the wing. And I'm going to measure that so that it's just past the tip of the existing wing. Somebody's not muted and we're getting a lot of background noise. And I pull up the stubs and trim them off so that they're clear of the eye. And wrap that down good. Now I have a bit of a tapered nose on this thing. So now I'm going to finish the fly off with the head. And the head is just a couple of strands of peacock herl. Pretty straightforward. And I'm going to put them together and I'm going to tie them in by the butt once I trim off the last little bit of the butt here. Snip it off so that it fits behind the eye so I don't crowd the eye of the hook. Tie them down. Bring my thread back and I'm going to let the thread hang just in front of where that throat is. And then I'm going to wrap my peacock herl around the hook right up to the eye. Then bring the peacock herl back so that it's nice thick head, not too bulky. And then I'm going to tie it off at the back here of the head, couple in front, couple behind, just make sure it's cinched down. And trim the tips off. And then I'm going to wiggle the thread up through that head just to reinforce it a little bit. And I'm going to whip finish off at the front. And when that's done, come in with my scissors and clean that thread off. We're done. So there you are, it's reasonably sparse. It's got that green back and a little bit of flash and a silver body. And it's maybe 1.5 inches long. So that's
pretty
it.
fly, Dave.
There we go. And actually not that difficult to tie. I think the key with this one is getting that tinsel body nice and flat. And I've tried that with wider and narrower tinsel. And the narrower stuff I seem to manage better. The wider stuff tends to kink up when it's wrapped over if you don't get a perfectly smooth shank of the hook.
Totally agree. I was using the exact same size 12.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to wrap than the 10.
Yeah, and the other two things that you do to get that smooth body, which you did as well, were to use the finer thread, 8/0.
Yeah.
Rather than 6/0, because that lets you kind of avoid making thread bumps. And the other one is to tie the materials the full length of the shank before you wrap them.
Yeah. That whole trick is getting that nice, smooth, even body. Move it a little closer, you can get a little better close up.
And Dave, in low water, people can just dress that lighter.
I think, yeah, you could even do it more sparse than that. Yeah.
I've seen a guy, well, I've used them too, very sparse and very clear and low water.
Yeah. And maybe just a few strands of polar bear, not much at all, and more of the flash than the polar bear. So you get the flash and not the bulk. So that's it for the day. And stop the recording.
Good, thank you, Dave.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, that was great.
That was great, yeah.